Members of our club to welcome you to today's Illinois Attorney General Candidate Forum that the club's Public Affairs Committee is delighted to present in partnership with the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. The Union League Club has the distinction of being the only private club in the United States with an institutional commitment to public policy and community service, which is connected to our founding in 1879 by a group of people who were involved in a movement called the Union Leagues of America, whose mission was to help President Lincoln defend the Union. So for the last 139 years, in addition to being a beautiful club, we also have a commitment to public policy and civic engagement, and we encourage people to inform themselves about those seeking to serve us in elected office. ICPR and the Union League Club of Chicago share many values in common. ICPR, a wonderful organization founded by the late great Senator Paul Simon and Lieutenant Governor Bob Custra, to promote many of the values that we celebrate on a daily basis here at the club. Informed citizenship, accountability, transparency in government service. And for all of those reasons, we are honored to welcome you here today. I've also learned a little bit of history making for this particular race, that today appears to be the only, or the first forum in the Attorney General cycle for the primary where all 10 candidates are on the same stage at the same time. And they've all done that because they knew you were all going to be here to watch them and to listen to them. So we thank you for being here. We are delighted to have ICPR as our partner and to bring this wonderful program here to the club. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce the leader of the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform, the Honorable Susan Garrett.
Everybody here, welcome our candidates. Thank you, Dave. ICPR really likes working with the Union League Club. It's always a pleasure because we actually share some of the same ideals, you know, in civic engagement, making sure that the public is informed of issues affecting our democracy. As the chair of ICPR, as well as our board that's many are here today, we are pleased to welcome you. And we are also very pleased that so many, all of the candidates running for AG are here today. We are looking forward to a robust conversation of addressing the critical issues affecting the Attorney General's Office of Illinois. And you should know, this is a tweetable item, that this is the first contested AG primary since 2002, 16 years, and now we have 2 Republican candidates and 8 Democratic candidates vying for this important office. I have to do a few housekeeping items. We will be live streaming today's discussion on our Facebook page and tweeting photos and pieces of our discussion. You can join in by tweeting at ILCampaign with the hashtag ILAGForum. Write that down. You will find event evaluation cards with your programs. Please take good time to fill them out. It means a great deal to us. You can tell us what you like about us, what you don't like about us. We won't take it personally, but it helps us as we plan future programs. Without further ado, I would like to invite our Executive Director, Sarah Bruni, to come forward and introduce our famous moderator, Carol Marie from NBC Chicago.
Being here. I'd like to invite the candidates to take their seats, and I'll introduce them while they're doing that. We have 2 Republicans and 8 Democrats with us today. 2 Republicans are the Honorable Grasso and Erika Harold. Our Democrats are the Honorable Scott Drury, Sharon Fairley, Goldstein, Renato Mariotti, the Honorable Pat Quinn, the Honorable Kwame Raoul, the Honorable Nancy Rotering, and Jesse Ruiz. They're all very honorable to us because they joined us today. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And so to get today's conversation started, I want to see one and only, the inimitable Carol Marie. Carol serves as NBC5's political editor, covering state, local, and national political stories. She's an award-winning reporter. She's won journalists' highest honors, including 3 George Foster Peabody Awards, 2 DuPont Columbia Awards, and 2 national Emmys. She's also on Chicago Tonight, as many of you know, and she directs the DePaul Center for Journalism, Integrity, and Excellence. Her knowledge of state politics is absolutely unmatched, and we're so honored to have her here today. So without further ado, Carol, please join us. Thank you so much.
Well, if this is any indication of interest in the race, a race by which the winners would win by very slender margins, this is a pretty amazing turnout. So thank you all for being here. My job is to sort of set the rules and then try to get people to stick to them. And they are these. There are no opening statements. There are no closing statements. There will be no filibusters, or I'll just have to interrupt, because, and I will, as you know. And partially it's just because there's so little time, so many people, so many issues, and we want to give everyone a chance to weigh in and to be heard. So let's begin. And I'm going to ask, and let me add this other thing. Every person won't get the same question or all the same questions, but this is a question that we're just going to go straight down the line on and get an answer. As we all know, in New York, the Attorney General has a very high profile with regard to joining with Special Counsel Robert Mueller in an investigation of financial fraud and Russia. In California, the Attorney General has a very high profile, especially with regard to the environment. The question to all of you, and I'll begin with you, Mr. Drury, is of the powers of the Attorney General that are outlined in the statute, is there some aspect of that statute that is underutilized, or some part of your role as Attorney General, if elected, that you would like to claim a new area of leadership on for the state of Illinois?
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, everybody, for coming out today. My name is Scott Drury. I am running for Attorney General. It's not just the statute. The Attorney General's powers come from statute, and they come from the Constitution. And in the Constitution, the Attorney General has very broad powers. And so as Attorney General, I'm going to clean up the state of Illinois. I'm going to finally stop outsourcing the public corruption function to the U.S. Attorney's offices, to the Better Government Association, to ICPR, and we're going to do that in-house. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I worked under Pat Fitzgerald for 7.5 years, and during that time, I prosecuted corrupt public officials. It didn't matter what party they were in. Our state is a mess and no one trusts it. So as Attorney General, I am committed to making sure that we end public corruption in the state of Illinois wherever it exists. If we need to partner with the U.S. Attorney's offices, we'll do that. If we need to partner with state's attorney's offices, we'll do that. But we are going to recruit the best and the brightest and the most motivated people to come into that office to make sure that people like Mike Madigan cannot get away with what they're doing.
Ms. Fairley?
Thank you, Carol. I also agree that the Attorney General's office needs to play a much more proactive role in rooting out government corruption and work on government integrity and transparency. This is really essential to our democracy, and as Scott said, the Constitution and the powers of the Attorney General under the Constitution and by statute are very broad, and we need more help here. There's a lot of problems in our state, and I believe that the Attorney General can play a much more proactive role in this. We need to, again, stop relying on the federal government to prosecute, but more than that, most people, when you think about government corruption, you only think about criminal prosecution, but it's much broader than that, because not all misconduct rises to the level of a criminal offense. And what we need to do is put checks and balances in place throughout our government, throughout the state, to ensure that when our government employees and when elected officials go off the rails, that they can be held accountable. The Attorney General can play a very proactive role in that by promoting checks and balances, providing guidance and support and legal guidance to our governments across the state to make sure that this happens.
Thank you. I'm Goldstein, and also running for Attorney General as a Democrat. So I think that the key issue here is being proactive. There's a lot of things that the Attorney General's office has done, but they haven't been proactive enough. Number one, we already spoke about corruption. In 2003, Lisa Madigan said corruption would be a top priority for her, even if it meant investigating her father. It's now 2018, and see where we're at. There isn't even an investigation of what he's done recently. So that's a very big issue. Number two, the environmental issues. Right now, the Attorney General's office is waiting for referrals from the EPA. We have Bruce Rauner as the governor. He's not going to have anything referred as far as environmental polluters. I would go right after environmental polluters. I would not wait for a referral from the Illinois EPA. Third thing is criminal justice reform. I believe Lisa Madigan hasn't been proactive enough And sometimes the proactivity is just not doing it. For example, there's a current lawsuit right now against Cook County regarding cash bail, saying that it's unconstitutional. I believe absolutely it's unconstitutional.
Mr. Grasso.
Lisa Madigan is defending that. You want to?
Yeah.
We're sharing mics.
Let me see if I can put it on. Yeah. Let me take this one. Thank you. Thanks. We're cooperating already. My name is Gary Grasso, and I'm running for Attorney General, and I am the Republican with the experience and the temperament to go after public corruption. Carol, you asked about what is the new leadership? It is about public corruption. As Aaron said, Lisa Madigan ran on that as a platform because that's what the people wanted, and then for 16 years did nothing about it. Guess why? A Republican is the only one, myself with my experience, is the only one that can make this a priority and do it. You use the powers of the Attorney General. What is the power of the Attorney General? It is all to advocate, to suggest legislation that's remedial, and mainly to litigate, which I have done for almost 40 years. You take the power of subpoena, you take the power of investigation. Don't forget, this office has 350 lawyers and over 350 other staff and investigators. Go after the property tax assessment system first in Cook County.
Ms. Harold.
Good afternoon, I'm Erika Harold, and I concur with many of the people up here that public corruption is a role that needs more visibility by the Attorney General. But public corruption is not just about being reactive, it's also empowering people through the Public Access Counselor and ensuring that there's good compliance with the Open Meetings Act and FOIA, because that really empowers citizens, media, and watchdog groups to be able to address some of the systemic issues that lead to corruption in the first place. And it's important for the Attorney General to be visible in this role because it's a unique platform, unlike state's attorneys and unlike U.S. attorneys. People expect it, and I would do it.
Mr. Mariotti.
I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm on the Democratic side running for Attorney General. And I agree that corruption needs to be an expanded role for the Attorney General. But frankly, I also think that the Attorney General needs to be on the front lines when the Trump administration is attacking our rights, is abusing its power, is undermining the Constitution. There are state's attorney generals, Carol talked about Eric Schneiderman, who are out there on the front lines, who are putting these suits together, who are using the resources of their office to do it. I have a plan, a detailed plan for the steps that I would take, the lawsuits that I would pioneer on behalf of people in this state, and frankly that would protect our labor unions, LGBTQ people here in Illinois, the dreamers who are going to be deported potentially over the upcoming year, and also protect our law enforcement resources from being used by the federal government against people in the state of Illinois.
Mr. Quinn.
I think the Attorney General has to use the Whistleblower Reward and Protection Act that now exists in Illinois to go after fraud and corruption at the state level, at the local level. This law was passed in 1991 when I was state treasurer. I authored the law. It was based on something Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War. He discovered there was sawdust being put into the Union gunpowder, and there were crooked people doing it, and they were prosecuted because whistleblowers told the Attorney General about these facts and evidence, and action was taken. We need to do the same thing in Illinois. A woman in southern Illinois reported wrongdoing by healthcare insurance companies, and the state and the federal government recovered $144 million. We can do this over and over again. All these complaints have to be filed with the Attorney General, and I think the Attorney General has to make sure that this law is well known to the people of Illinois so it can be used.
Mr. Raoul.
I think the Attorney General's office can be more active in interrupting violence. Schneiderman's office, for example, is very much involved in gun tracing guns involved in crimes. In addition, we have neighborhoods of normalized violence, and the Attorney General's office has the power to direct victims' resources. I think we need to direct some of those resources to interrupt and treat the trauma of children who live in neighborhoods of normalized violence.
Ms. Rotering.
So the culture and the priorities of the office have to come from the top. I've done that as a mayor. I've been a mayor for 7 years. And the areas that I would work on, in addition to the legacy that Lisa Madigan has set forth, would be to work and continue my work on fighting the NRA. We banned assault weapons and large capacity magazines in my city, got sued, taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we prevailed. I would use the bully pulpit to fight gun violence in our state. I would also find the efficiencies that exist currently within the state's attorneys. I've talked to a number of them. There are opportunities. This is a woefully underfunded office that has a broad expanse it needs to reach. And then I also would empower the residents. We have areas of concern in environmental hazards and polluters, and also in corruption at local government levels. We need to give people the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to act on their own behalfs and protect our natural resources and also hold our elected officials accountable.
Mr. Ruiz?
Good to be back here at the ICPR. A few years ago, I was here on a panel with Paul Vallis and Laura Washington, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what Laura's going to run for soon, since 2 of the 3 on the panel ended up doing that. But at that panel, we were talking about CPS, and at that time, I called for CPS briefings to be done in open session. They're not done in open session, so the Open Meeting Act has to be more vigorously enforced, as long as with the Freedom of Information Act, there's more sunshine that needs to be shined on all levels of government, and media at all levels are not flush on budgets. We have to make their jobs easier. They shouldn't have to sue governmental bodies to get information that they're entitled to. Citizens shouldn't have to go to great lengths. I will make sure that when I bring those suits if necessary, I will compel those units of government to be more open and transparent, and I look forward to making my former colleagues do their board briefings in public.
This next question is really just a show of hands. 2 questions. Question number 1, should the Speaker of the House resign as Chairman of the Democratic Party? Show of hands. Next question, should Mike Madigan resign in his role as House Speaker?
Hands meeting yes.
Hands meeting yes. Hands meeting yes. Thank you. Is there potentially a case for criminal negligence by state officials in the handling of the Quincy Veterans Home, Ms. Harold?
I think it's too soon to know exactly what people knew and when, and I think it's important that there would be an independent investigation to find that out. I think independence is important. Independence is important as it relates to the Attorney General's office, and I think independence is important as it relates to any investigation. I wouldn't prejudge the evidence, but I think there should be an independent investigation and see where the evidence leads.
May I ask your Republican opponent that same question?
Yes, Carol, you may. You cannot, at this point, assume there's been a basis for criminal activity there. Certainly, we have to protect our veterans, and we have to protect the families and make sure that what has happened there in Quincy doesn't happen again. So a full investigation is required, and just like in any discovery process, just like in anything that the Attorney General would do and should do, this is a province for the Attorney General, that should be done in an orderly fashion, and then you go and follow the evidence, and the chips fall where they may. If it ends up to the level of criminality, then you go after it. If it's corruption, if it's mismanagement, you go after that too. The important thing is, what is the goal? Let's rectify what happened there and make sure it doesn't happen again to our great veterans or anyone that's in that situation.
Do any of you up here believe there is right now enough of a foundation, enough of a prima facie case for a criminal negligence cause of action? Mr. Quinn?
I don't think there's any question that when the failure to disclose the information to the families and to the workers and to the public, the long delay, there's obviously wrongdoing, and I think it has to be brought to justice. The information that's coming out through the hearings right now indicate that there are people who knew about the existence of salmonella, or the Legionnaire's disease, and did not tell people, including a woman who died and was in her room for several days without anyone knowing. And I think that's a matter that has to be brought into justice.
Mr. Mariotti, do you agree?
I don't, and I think that frankly this shows the governor's lack of experience in criminal law and criminal investigation. First of all, I think it's irresponsible at this point, before an investigation has been undertaken and completed, to be making accusations about criminal activity on the part of people there or elsewhere. It's just not something you do when you are an attorney general. It's irresponsible. And frankly, the bar is very high in terms of criminal behavior. You have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Even merely an indictment is just an allegation, and I think at this point, certainly there's awful, there's awful suffering there. But what the purpose of the Attorney General is to investigate and bring people to justice. But part of that is our system of laws, which is investigating first, following the evidence, instead of prejudging it to make political points.
Mr. Ruiz, should there be a prohibition on a lawmaker beyond recusing him or herself from earning income from outside sources that interact with government?
Yes. We need a much more stringent conflict of interest policy. Folks should not be profiting off of their public service in any way whatsoever. And unfortunately, I think we've seen that permeate the culture of Springfield, definitely, and as well as Cook County and Chicago government. So we need to dispel that to have the government we deserve. And there should be the disclosure, folks who fill the economic disclosure, it's frankly a joke what it asks for. It's far failing to ask, if you're a member of a law firm, is your law firm doing business with the bodies that you're then voting on?
Mr. Raoul, do you agree?
I don't agree. I think we have a citizens legislature. I think certainly I'm working right now with the Campaign for Political Reform on expanding the disclosure of the statement of economic interest. But by way of embracing the nature that we have a citizens legislature, everything comes into conflict. Every profession comes into conflict with state law at some point or the other, and that's where recusal comes into place. It's very difficult to statutorily draw the line as to
I think this is a question we need actually everybody to weigh in. Ms. Rotering, what do you think?
I disagree with Senator Raoul. When I became mayor, I realized that people who were serving on commissions were then representing clients in front of the city council for decisions that had come before those very commissions, and immediately took action and implemented a new conflict of interest rule. I think it's vitally important to our democracy to know that the people who are representing us and not personal interests and not personally getting enriched at the detriment of the public that they've been elected to serve.
Governor Quinn?
Well, I think we need a mandatory conflict of interest amendment in Illinois. The legislators are voting on bills where they have personal and financial interests. Other states have mandatory conflict of interest standards. They also have citizen legislatures. Here's a petition we circulated in 1976 where 635,158 Illinois citizens signed a petition for a binding constitutional amendment to end conflict of interest. The Attorney General should have no conflicts of interest, neither should state senators.
Mr. Mariani.
I agree with the words that Governor Quinn said. I agree that we should not have conflicts of interest in the legislature, and frankly, even the appearance of a conflict is a problem. I think, let's be real, the legislature has lost the faith of a lot of people across the state of Illinois. That said, he was saying in this race, we should also, and the Attorney General should be free of conflicts of interest. I think on his part, that also means not accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars from property appeals lawyers. Property tax appeals lawyers. I think, all the special interest money flowing into this race really casts a pall for voters who are paying attention, and it's up to all of you to do your homework, because those 30-second ads don't say, paid for by property tax appeal lawyers or paid for by comment at the bottom.
Ms. Harold?
I don't think recusal is sufficient. I think there should be a bar, because I think when people are representing you, that you should be able to be very confident that it's just your interests that are being represented and that there's not economic interests that are at play.
Mr. Rizzo?
Thank you. It has to be even more than that. Look, you all know what's been wrong with this state for over 30 years, and it starts with the money and the conflicts of interest and in the property tax assessment system in Cook County that reverberates throughout the state. It makes properties in the poor areas of Cook County less overvalued. It gives breaks to commercial and industrial high-end properties in Cook County for the benefit of Mr. Madigan and those connected. And all that money goes back into the system to keep them in office and keep you getting smaller and smaller equity in your homes.
Mr. Goldstein.
There's two aspects to this. There's having other jobs outside of being a legislator and the money that's flowing in that's creating conflicts of interest. As to the jobs, there's an old Chicago Bulls coach, Tom Thibodeau. He had a famous line, "Do your job." That's what they need to do. We elected them to do their job. Don't go making it a side hustle. That's absolutely ridiculous that you're doing other jobs while you're legislating for the people. Do your job. If you can't handle it, quit. As far as the money that's coming in here, it's creating an absolute conflict of interest. If you elect some of these candidates here as Attorney General, not me, with all the money that's coming in, the big tobacco, the coal companies, the utilities, red light camera companies, over close to $500,000 from politicians, if you elect these individuals, they're going to have a conflict of interest on every case. They're going to be recusing themselves. We're going to elect potentially someone, and they're not even going to be able to try a case because they're conflicted out. So that's a huge issue in this race.
Ms. Fairley.
I definitely agree that a conflict of interest law should be put in place here. It's terribly important at this point in time. Listen, in our ethics law, we have prohibitions against political activities, gift bans, revolving door. This lack of a conflict of interest position is conspicuously missing. And I believe that this lack is what's led to the sort of entrenchment of the political leaders in our state. And that's why we have these leaders, they get in positions and all they do is further enhance their power by also helping to elect others who are going to help keep them there. And I think you're seeing right now here, Senator Raoul's lack of commitment to ethics and conflict, his lack of understanding of how important this is an issue, the issue of conflict of interest is. And so this is, I think you've got to the crux of the issue of what's important in this race, is that we need an Attorney General who has the independence and really understands how important that the idea of independence is in service to our government.
Before I get to you, Mr. Drury, Mr. Raoul, would you like to respond to that?
I think I understand the conflicts of interest quite well. What I gave is an honest answer about the realities of having a citizens legislature. If you're a nurse, for example, and you work as a nurse and you're a legislator, when there are issues impacting public health, there's a presumed conflict of interest. We can tighten up conflict of interest laws. I'm not saying that we cannot do that, but I'm saying inherently, by the way of having a citizens legislature, you're going to have conflicts of interest.
Mr. Drury?
A couple things. Obviously, we can tell that everybody here knows how to answer the question the way it should be answered. But let's look at what people have really done, because I've been in the General Assembly now for 6 years. And for 6 years, I have had legislation that says let's ban outside employment for legislative leaders, Speaker of the House, the minority leaders, President of the Senate. I talked to Governor Quinn about that on day one because he was the reformed governor and never got his support for that. Okay, so we do need to reform the statement of economic interest, but there's been no support from my colleagues, and actually anybody up here hasn't really heard, like, hey, can I promote your bill? With respect to statement of economic interest, I had a bill to reform it because it is a joke. It's an absolute joke. 3 of the 5 questions are exactly the same on that form, and no one even knows what those 3 questions mean. So you need somebody who's not just going to answer the questions correctly here. You need somebody who has a history of actually trying to get the job done and doing the right thing. I have been pushing a reform agenda. It's called the People's Plan for 6 years.
Well, let's give Mr. Quinn a chance to respond. Mr. Quinn?
Please do.
Well, I signed the bill for the farthest reaching ethics laws in our state history. It's after an ethics scandal alleging the impeachment of my successor and his conviction. I signed a bill that established the public access counselor in the Attorney General's office. For the first time, we had limits on campaign finance. This organization sponsored today advocated to that. They called Illinois the Wild West because we didn't have limits. I signed a bill for that. And they also got on the ballot a constitutional amendment allowing the people to petition and have a referendum to recall a governor that they don't agree with or they feel is corrupt. That happened with George Ryan and Rod Blagojevich, and it won't happen again. So I think that's a pretty good record.
You may go.
So the main people that did the Reform Commission, Patrick Collins and David Hoffman, were colleagues of mine at the U.S. Attorney's Office. They went down there for 100 days and they issued a report saying, this is what needs to be done. Susan Garrett was there too. This is what needs to be done. Not a single recommendation that they made was adopted by Governor Quinn.
Mr. Quinn?
That's completely false. Matter of fact, some of the members of the commission came to the governor's mansion at breakfast and went over specifics in the bills that were passed. Ethics reform, comprehensive ethics reform for state employees, for lobbyists, for legislators. It was not perfect. I wish we could have done more. I believe in an ethics initiative where voters can petition and have referendums on ethics when the legislature doesn't agree. But we couldn't get that passed through the legislature. We got a lot passed.
This wouldn't be formed from the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform if we didn't become a little more granular on contributions in campaigns. Mr. Raoul, let's start with you. You got $100,000 from tobacco-related donors. There are those critics who believe that's a problem if you're elected Attorney General. Why isn't it?
Well, you know, I have a record. Carol, I've been serving in the legislature for 13 years. I've received contributions from folks who have interest in tobacco in the past. My record of voting on items that involve tobacco interests has been 100% with the American Lung Association. So I'm not for sale. It's simple as that.
This is to three of you who are self-funders. That's Ms. Fairley, Mr. Grasso, Mr. Goldstein. Ms. Fairley, you've given yourself $420K, at least by our count. Mr. Grasso, $80K. Mr. Goldstein, $200K. Does self-funding raise the specter that you don't have grassroots support to pull from? Ms. Fairley?
Yeah, I'd love to address that. Absolutely not. I mean, because that's only a fraction of the money that I have. I actually have raised a lot of money from the grassroots spaces, and the thing about it is, like, I didn't create the laws on campaign finance, which are pretty terrible in my view, and I'm not the one who broke the caps in this case that created a situation where we had hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to a lot of candidates from sources that are, there's a lot of conflict of interest. I'm not in conflict with myself. Mr.
No, it doesn't indicate that. It indicates that you need to work within the system. And I've raised, now since I've made my issues and gotten them forward, political corruption, the opioid issues, the need for the public pension reform, now I'm getting more and more donations. So I have much more money at my disposal now than the money I put in. But I am willing. I'm willing to fight for this job, not run for re-election on the county board, and put my money up and put my agenda forward so I can earn your votes.
Mr. Goldstein.
Don't tell my wife and kids that I put that much money in. Look, I put in that amount of money, and I'm pretty much last in money brought in. I don't know a tobacco company CEO. I don't know. I'm not good friends with Cullerton and Don Harmon, who gave the senator nearly 80 grand. I'm not friends with the red light camera companies. So I don't have those connections. What you don't see when you do see the disclosures, you don't see the small donations that are coming in. You don't see the $25, the $50, the $100 contributions. And like I said, or like Sharon said, I did not break the caps. Representative Drury broke the caps right before the end of the year. And even my donations didn't even break the caps. I have to do everything I can to be competitive against basically people who are getting money from CEOs, individuals that I want to investigate. If I'm getting nearly $500,000 from politicians, you know I'm not going to be investigating them, and I'm not getting that.
Mr. Drury, you did blow off the caps. Was that a good idea?
There's a system, there's a game that Governor Quinn created with what he calls campaign finance reform, which says that there's all sorts of different ways to play this. So look, I'm proud to be the biggest donor to my campaign. I still am in second place in fundraising outside of that, and it wasn't because of the money I put in. But I want to get back to this tobacco money because something wasn't being said. It's not the fact that there was $100,000 that came from tobacco money. It gets to the game that's played with campaign finance. So before the caps were broken, a company could only contribute up to $11,000. Up to $11,000. This tobacco company set up 10 shell companies. And each shell company gave $10,000 to Senator Raoul. And so that's how the game is played. That's our government. That's our government, and it makes me sick. It makes me sick. It's why I ran for office, because we don't need people like that who are going to, like, in broad daylight, launder money. It's got to stop.
Ms. Rotering, Mr. Ruiz, Ms. Harold, you have taken money in Ms. Rotering's case from People's Gas, Exelon, ComEd. Mr. Ruiz, ComEd, Exelon, People's Gas. Ms. Harold, People's Gas, ComEd, Exelon. As the Attorney General who has some oversight and regulation of these companies, was that a proper thing to do? Ms. Harold, let's begin with you.
I would approach it very much the way a lawyer would with conflicts of interest. If at any point in time I thought a contribution created a conflict of interest, I would not accept the contribution. I've received contributions from a wide variety of sources, and I don't believe that those contributions would create one. If there was a case that was pending before the Attorney General's office, then I would obviously not accept any contributions, but as the current state is, I don't believe there's a conflict of interest.
Mr. Ruiz.
There is no pending matters before the Attorney General's office, which is the bright line, and I'm following the exact model that Lisa Madigan followed, and she's been a vigorous champion of ratepayers, and she would accept contributions before becoming Attorney General, and I would cease doing it upon becoming office if in case those matters came up. There's a big difference between taking something when there's a pending matter, which the top tobacco matters are still pending, which is why I have so much of an issue with that, and Senator Raoul defended it by saying, quote, I talked to the Attorney General does not control that lawsuit, yet the Attorney General's statement to Greg Hines in a Crane's article said, a similar dispute currently is being arbitrated between Illinois and roughly 25 companies, including Top Tobacco. That's the difference. There's not a current matter that's pending. That's a clear conflict of interest. Any lawyer who practices law would know if you have a pending matter, you could definitely not take money from that party.
Ms. Rotary? So in 2011, as mayor, I took on ComEd for failure to provide reliable service in northeastern Illinois and ended up joining a lawsuit with Lisa Madigan that went to the Illinois Supreme Court and resulted in over $50 million invested in the infrastructure in that area. So needless to say, when they called at the end of last year and said, we want to offer you money towards your campaign, I was pretty surprised. But at the time, we were competing, and it's a large state, and we need to reach the voters. This gets to the bigger issue of why we need campaign finance reform. But I also said to them, I'm not going to stop talking about our experience in 2011 and 2018 when Jesse Ruiz and Kwame Raoul and Erika Harold got more money. I did not. So that should tell you a little something about what their intentions were. That notwithstanding, I have a record of 9 years in elected service, in elected office, and I've had to raise money to reach the voters. There is not a single vote on my record that ties me to doing any favors for anybody, and that will continue to be the trend.
Mr. Quinn, you've taken labor union money. Are you too friendly with labor?
Friendly with working people. Actually, the labor unions have given far more money to the senator on my left here than they have to me in this election. Over the years, I've had a good relationship with organized labor. I believe in collective bargaining. But most of all, I believe in people who work hard. And I think if you're governor or attorney general, you've got to advocate for working people. Raise the minimum wage, take on wage theft where it occurs, make sure there's equal pay for equal work. And those are the kinds of issues that I think the attorney general's got to focus on.
Mr. Mariotti, you've taken money from lawyers, from big firms. Big firms have a big interest in taking care of their clients against any action against the attorney general. Does that pose a problem?
Well, I'll tell you, the people who have donated to my campaign are people I know, people who knew me personally, and frankly, were investing in me as a human being. I will be very frank with you. That's all that she can really ask me about, because I haven't taken money from utilities, politicians, red light camera companies. I've put in millions of dollars. I don't have millions of dollars to put in. I'm somebody who has talked to my friends, talked to people I knew, and went online and asked people for $20 at a time. So that's why I have more individual donors than everyone else here. And it is really damn hard to raise money that way. I'm going to tell you, it is really hard, and it is a shame. Everyone listening to these questions and answers should be ashamed of our system and should do something about it, period.
Sexual harassment is at the forefront of much of our discussions, and I'm really interested, and this is a question for all of you, for a specific answer. What exactly can the Attorney General of Illinois do on the front of sexual harassment that would make a difference and do what has not to date been done? Mr. Ruiz?
Well, it's got to set the model of behavior in the office at first with your own employees and make sure.
Doesn't that go without saying?
It does, but it hasn't been done, and we have to make
in
sure.
In the AG's office?
Not that I'm aware of, that there's a policy that has been set forth and been trumpeted throughout state government, that then there's an ombudsperson in that office that can receive complaints from throughout state government and from campaigns and campaign interns and volunteers.
Ms. Rotering, what specifically could the AG do on sexual harassment that's not been done?
3 things. 1, we can push to have the Human Rights Act amended so that all employers are included. Right now, there are exemptions for certain functions, certain sizes. I think anybody who employs anybody needs to be held accountable and prohibit sexual harassment in the workplace. We need to set up a hotline, a confidential hotline, so that people can report directly to the Attorney General's office in a way that will protect them from potential retaliation or possibly violence. And we also need to change the laws so that serial sexual harassers are viewed as the criminals that they are. We did that 20 years ago with stalking, and the laws need to be changed now so that serial sexual harassers are treated as the predators that they are.
Mr. Raoul, what would you do specifically that isn't done?
I think creating an additional safe place to go. I think in the instance where there was no Inspector General, Legislative Inspector General, even if there was one for victims, they might not have considered the Inspector General to be a safe place to go. If the Attorney General created an alternative place.
Would that be the leadership in the House and the Senate as well? Because there was an Inspector General that wasn't filled, right?
Well, what I mean, it wasn't filled. That's exactly.
But I mean, it wasn't filled.
That's my point. I think we're saying the same thing. But my point was, even if it was filled, there may be somebody who was a victim that didn't have the confidence in the legislative Inspector General. The Attorney General's office can create an alternative safe place to go and then thereafter investigate.
Mr. Quinn?
Well, I agree with Mayor Rotering on the hotline to make sure we amend the human rights law to include all employers. And I think it's very, very important to understand what did not happen in the Illinois legislature. The Senate went along for 3 years without a legislative Inspector General. 27 harassment complaints were filed. Clearly that law has to be changed. From now on, we cannot rely on senators, including my colleague to the left of me here, who failed to act over 3 years when these complaints came in. And I think it's very important to have the law in Springfield change, give the Attorney General enhanced powers when the legislature won't act to fill their own legislative Inspector General for 3 years as complaints mount.
Did you not act, Mr. Rowe?
I don't serve on the Legislative Ethics Commission, which appoints the Legislative Inspector General. I don't know whether there were 27 harassment complaints. What I do know is that there are 27 ethics complaints filed, 27 complaints to the Legislative Inspector General. If somehow Governor Quinn has been able to unveil all of those who know that they're all harassment complaints, I don't know how he's been able to do so. So that just tells you that's an indication of the veracity of what comes out of his
Mr. Mariotti, what would you do that has not been done?
Oh, wait a minute.
Go ahead.
One of the complaints clearly involved the senator. It's been found that he was unbecoming conduct of the legislature. The senators, who have given thousands of dollars to Senator Raoul, did not act. They all are senators. When they see there's no Inspector General, they say, well, there's no, what are we going to do? Nothing. They hid those complaints. They covered them up. And I think the people have to know what those complaints are all about. That's the truth. That's what veracity is.
Mr. Mariotti, what would you do that has not been done?
Well, first of all, I mean, we've heard this debate. I mean, the reality is you can't trust the General Assembly or the police itself. And we should take that function of Legislative Inspector General outside of the legislature. They shouldn't be the one making the appointment. It needs to be outside, first of all. Secondly, that is a civil office that does not have any criminal authority whatsoever. So we need to extend the statute of limitations. One thing we've learned, one of the women that came forward recently about sexual assault down in Springfield talked about it for something that happened many years ago. We need to extend the statute of limitations so women that come forward later can have justice done to the perpetrators against them. And frankly, the Attorney General can prosecute some of those cases. A percentage of those can be prosecuted by the Attorney General. The rest of them, we need to do more to support those prosecutions by state's attorneys.
Ms. Harold.
I believe the General Assembly needs to give the Attorney General greater oversight and jurisdiction over the Inspectors General, because one of the reasons why people fear coming forward is that they won't be believed and that they will be retaliated against. As someone who's been the victim of sexual harassment, I understand firsthand that's why people do not come forward. And if people don't think that their complaint will be acted upon and that they will be retaliated against, they won't. And so the Attorney General does need to have jurisdiction to be able to be somebody who can, when you see these vacancies occurring and when you see complaints not acted on, that the Attorney General actually has the power to do something beyond just the bully pulpit.
Mr. Grasso?
Carol, your comment is it should go unspoken. It has to be spoken about first. We have to say that sexual harassment is unacceptable, and then there has to be a system in place so that it is properly pursued. It is the province of the Attorney General. The Attorney General should already be involved with the sexual harassment issues in the legislature. Why isn't she? The leader, Mr. Madigan, should not be appointing his own investigation. There should be a system in play, already led by the Attorney General, where someone can be confident to make a sexual harassment claim, that it will be fairly heard, that there will be due process so that some of these complaints don't go into the public unless there's been due process, and then there has to be severe consequences.
Mr. Goldstein.
I think it's very simple. Investigate. The Attorney General has the power to investigate and prosecute these things, whether they're civil matters or criminal matters. And if they don't find anything that they can go to court and do anything about it, they can report it to us and let everyone know what was going on. Now, how in the world was Michael Madigan part of this harassment scheme, basically? He covered it up. And where were the complaints? Did they go to his daughter? I don't know. And did they not go to his daughter because she's his daughter? We'll never know, but the point is that's why you need independence. If you are getting money from the senators that potentially are going to be investigated for sexual harassment, you're obviously not going to prosecute them, go after them. So the independence is just the crucial point of this entire race. And if you investigate these things, you'll find them out, and you'll be able to report them to the public.
Ms. Fairley.
There's a lot that the Attorney General needs to do in this space. So the first thing is the Attorney General needs to work within the office and work with the Legislative Inspector General to make sure that there's a complaint intake function that is a place where people feel comfortable coming, to make sure that those complaints can be founded. But then we have to make sure that an independent investigation is done. Right now, when you look at what's going on, the proposals that are being made to deal with sexual harassment, some of the legislators are saying that they want to set up an independent system that's separate from the Legislative Inspector General to have them investigate themselves. That's not independent, that's inappropriate. What we need to do is revise the legislative ethics statute, because it makes that office a toothless watchdog. It has to ask for permission to issue a subpoena, and even it does limit the activity of the Attorney General. It does say that the Attorney General can't get involved in an investigation until the investigation has reached a certain stage, and that's inappropriate. So the first thing is to focus on is revising that statute to give the Legislative Inspector General the powers that it needs to do an effective independent investigation.
Mr. Drury?
The question is, why is this even a question? In a democratic society, why is this a question? And I'll tell you, as someone who's in the House of Representatives, Mike Madigan is a type of evil you can't imagine. No, it's not funny. It's not funny, because that's our government. And so everyone sits here and says we need an independent investigator. Well, in October, when the Me Too movement came out, I proposed a statute, an independent investigation statute. I said we need a Bob Mueller to come in and uncover what is going on in our state. The next day I get a letter from Lisa Madigan saying, oh, the Legislative Inspector General can handle it. There was none. And I said, that's not right. We need an independent person who can figure this out. Now, what I didn't know was at the same time, Elena Hampton, that brave young woman, was coming forward to the speaker saying, I need your help because I've been harassed by your staff. And you have the Attorney General of Illinois protecting her dad. You have an evil man who decided, instead of being open and transparent, he said, what's the playbook of the Catholic Church? What's the playbook of Penn State? That's the type of person I want to be. And I'm sorry, but it has to be said, there's statutes out there, I have a proposal out there. We need an independent person who has criminal indictment power to see what the heck happened in our state.
Do fellow candidates agree or disagree with an independent special prosecutor in this regard? Mr. Ruiz, do you?
Definitely. And it should be somebody like a Mueller type investigation
Ms.
outside of
Rotering,
Illinois.
do you? Until we just do this quickly. Okay, Ms. Rotering? Absolutely. Okay, just
I support an independent investigation.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Minotti?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Harold, yes.
Yes.
Mr. Grasso?
Yes.
Mr. Goldstein?
Yes, and the AG should be that independent. I don't understand why that's even a question. If I'm the AG, I'm the independent prosecutor in that case.
Ms. Fairley?
Yes, I've already said it requires independent investigation.
So Lisa Madigan joined in a Justice Department suit to try to deal with a consent decree because of the Chicago Police Department, because of the shootings in Chicago. Will, just a quick raise of hands first, how many of you will continue to fight in court to achieve a consent decree? Am I missing any hand? The problem of guns in this state and in this city is enormous, but there's a real question. We can all talk about it, but specifically, is there something the Attorney General right now has as a tool, not to get new legislation and not to be a figurehead speaking or bully pulpit, there's something right now the Attorney General can do that is not being done in regard to guns? Mr. Grasso?
That's what I went away. Yes, Carol, absolutely. We've seen in these mass shootings one common factor. It's a mental health issue. We have some pretty strong laws already. In place where the Attorney General can act immediately. And that is, there's been studies that show that hospitals and other areas are not complying with the FOIA Act, the Concealed Carry Act, that requires investigation when someone has been committed for mental health, when has been self-committed, or when there's a clear and present danger been determined by a clinician, a doctor, marriage counselor, etc.
So you're saying the Attorney General can intervene in one of those cases and
Yes.
seek some sort of mental health confinement? Is that what I'm understanding?
No, take the guns away. From people who have been found to have these problems, and they have guns, you can use the state police system to go in and take the FOIA cards, the concealed carry, and stop these people from getting guns.
Ms. Rotary?
Three things. As I mentioned earlier, I banned assault weapons. We were taken to the Supreme Court. It's now constitutional to ban them in the state of Illinois.
That means legislation?
It does mean legislation. In addition to that, we can use the crime victims' dollars that are currently in place in the AG's office and use those to move forward to stop the normalization of violence in our neighborhoods and help people who are both trauma victims who have turned to crime because they have those challenges psychologically and in their neighborhoods. And third, join with other attorneys general to take federal action. We currently have concealed carry reciprocity passed in the House of Representatives, which makes absolutely no sense. And we also need to allow gun data to be studied by the CDC. Currently, there's a federal prohibition of that. We need to face the facts. This is not just a public safety issue, it's a public health issue, it's an epidemic.
Mr. Ruiz, do you agree, disagree?
Well, that's legislation, but things you could do today. You could investigate the current concealed carry appeals process. You know, they're rarely ever upheld. And so it's a process that's not working, that's allowing people who shouldn't have the ability to have concealed carry weapons have them. It's obviously something that was set up and doesn't work. There's one thing you can immediately do today, and you asked for things that did not require legislation. That does not require legislation.
Anyone else who has a specifically, Mr.
Yes.
Quinn?
Okay.
Good.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned.
Hang on, Mr. Quinn, hang on, Mr. Drury.
Every year, the gun industry produces more guns than they know are needed. They know that their guns are going to be sold to straw purchasers, which are people who are buying guns just to give to criminals. And we know that we have technology that can ban that, but they don't want it, which is you could put a thumbprint on a gun, so only the person who bought the gun can use it.
Isn't that legislation?
No, so what we can do, what the Attorney General can do right now is, the Attorney General can be creative and say, look, you are flooding the market with guns that you know are going to be stolen. We could look at the data just like we did with tobacco, and we could say, can we bring a conspiracy claim against these gun manufacturers for being part of this gun violence? We need to be able to think outside the box. I think we can, and certainly as Attorney General, I'm going to be a forward thinker and not just say, hey, I trust the General Assembly, which, you know,
Mr. Mariotti doesn't think you can. Mr. Mariotti?
Yeah, one of the problems that we have, so people know, is that gun manufacturers actually have immunity against a variety of suits. It is very difficult, and I will tell you, I've had people approach me trying to, you know, ask me for my help in crafting these suits. I've spent a lot of time trying to creatively work with my clients to help them. And the fact of the matter is it's difficult because Congress gave immunity to gun manufacturers. So frankly, we need to push to change that, but it is not as simple as it sounds to just bring that suit.
But you're talking about legislation. Mr. Quinn.
I don't agree with him. Matter of fact, the families of Newtown, Connecticut, who lost their children, their first and second graders, who came to Illinois and stayed at the governor's mansion, worked with me on banning assault weapons and banning or limiting high-capacity ammunition magazines, right now have a lawsuit in the Connecticut Supreme Court. Aaron Goldstein can tell you more about it as well, to have a state court action that finds the gun manufacturers liable for the damage and loss of life that they cause.
So what would the Attorney General here do?
Well, I think the Attorney General of Illinois should join, in our state, the same kind of suit. We lost students at Northern Illinois University. I went to the the memorial of their lives on Valentine's Day 10 years ago. They lost their lives, and I think it's important the Attorney General brings suit against the gun manufacturers, and we need to come up with the same kind of theory of law that they're using in Connecticut right now.
Mr. Ruiz.
No, Aaron Goldstein.
Thank you, but I'm moderating. Mr. Ruiz.
I'll go again.
I thought I saw you shaking your head and disagreeing.
Well, he said he was going to join another state suit. You can't join another state suit in state court. Again, it's something I think I pointed to something that's actionable that you can do today, as opposed to things that are, you know, we're going to hope work. And that's where I'm always focused on with this office. What are real things we can do today, as opposed to these aspirational things that aren't going to get us the solutions and make our streets safer now?
Mr. Raoul, specifically what?
So the City of Chicago Police Department is involved in gun tracing. The New York AG is involved in gun tracing. Gun violence is not quarantined to the City of Chicago. The AG should take this to a statewide scale. Secondly, as I said before, and as Nancy mentioned, the AG sits on the board of the Criminal Justice Information Authority. As you may remember, 4 years ago, there was hastily $54 million of violence prevention money put out on the street in the eve of an election. That money was shifted to the umbrella of the Criminal Justice Information Authority. The AG can weigh in on data-driven, evidence-based violence intervention. We have to intervene. We can work on gun policies till Earth freezes over, but if we don't change the behavior, if we don't invest in resources and violence-plagued communities, we won't stop the gun violence.
Mr. Goldstein, would you have something to say?
Look, I've been saying this from day one, sue the gun manufacturers. Yes, there's immunity, but there are exceptions. As the governor said, there's a current lawsuit before the Connecticut Supreme Court against the gun manufacturers regarding the Newtown massacres. There have been success stories. And how dare you say, well, I'm not going to be aspirational. That's my race, is to be aspirational. I want to stop violence. I'm going to do anything in my power as an attorney. Talk to the people who fought for civil rights when they said, oh, you can't end segregation. That's aspirational. Talk to the people who went after the tobacco companies who said, oh, you can't beat the big tobacco companies. That's aspirational. Excuse me. I'm going to be aspirational, and I apologize for that.
Thank you. There are a number of things that the Attorney General can do on this front that doesn't necessarily involve legislation. The first thing is we need effective policing, and through police reform. We know that the murder closure rate for the Chicago Police Department was 17% last year. And so we need police reform to improve police-community relationships and make sure that we are implementing effective evidence-based crime-fighting strategy, not only in Chicago, but throughout the state. And the Attorney General can work on that. The second thing is the Attorney General actually can take and prosecute gun cases. Working with federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement, the Attorney General can take on more of those cases. And then the last thing is, we need to treat gun violence for the public health issue that it is. So the Attorney General can use the bully pulpit to promote and advocate for programming that goes into these affected communities that supports things like quality after-school programs, early education, positive social emotional development programs, programs on parenting skills, economic development, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment. So we need to have programs to support that deal with the underlying problems that cause gun violence, as well as dealing with prosecution and then renewing state laws.
Though what we said there would not be open or closing statements, all of you are professionals, you're talented lawyers, you're smart people. As we close this session, would each of you, in 2 sentences, tell us what makes, because you all agree on an awful lot of stuff, and that's the other part of it, what distinguishes you from the other 9 people here that makes your candidacy jump up? And let me start with Mr. Drury.
Thank you again for attending. If you think the state of Illinois is great and you're happy with it and you come here because you're just like, I want more of the same, don't vote for me. Okay, I'm the only legislator in the last 30 years who didn't vote for Mike Madigan to be the Speaker of the House. I'm the only one with a record of actually standing up to fix the state of Illinois. This campaign is about fixing the state of Illinois, not a piece of legislation.
That's 4 sentences.
It's a
So I believe I'm the only candidate in this race that has 2 really important things: the required experience and the required independence. From experience perspective, I have criminal prosecution experience, I have investigative experience, I have complex litigation experience, I have legal experience that spans both criminal, civil, and administrative law. From the independence perspective, I'm unbought and I'm unbossed. I haven't taken any money from anybody that has a conflict with the office.
First, I think even my Republican colleagues can agree that there's a lot of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, so I don't want to say that all 10 of us are really in agreement. The 8 of us, maybe a little more so. But I'm the only one who's a public defender. I represent people who are poor, who have no hope. I stand next to them every single day. As far as experience, I've tried hundreds of cases. I've been in federal court, state court, civil court, criminal court. I've done all of these cases. I represent people on civil rights cases. I've represented families whose kids were shot and killed by the police. I have that experience.
It's my experience both as a litigator and a public official with a track record. That's what you need in the Attorney General's office now. Someone who's got a purpose, political corruption, the opioid issues, public pensions, has the experience as a litigator and also has the experience as an administrator of large budgets at a time when this state is broken. I can repurpose the Office of Attorney General, direct it to where it needs to be, and I have the experience at both levels, law and administration. That's what distinguishes me from my opponent and everybody else here.
Ms. Harold.
First, I want to say it's a privilege to share the stage with such an accomplished group of public servants. I think what would enable me to be able to move the state forward is, first and foremost, I come from a background that's not reflected too often in the Republican Party. That gives me an opportunity not only to push my party forward on issues where we need to make progress, but to be able to work in a state where the reality is that we have to be able to work together to achieve change. So I think of everybody on this stage, I'm the one who can create the change that we need.
Mr. Mariotti.
So amongst the Democratic candidates, I'm the only person who's really not a politician or an insider who is running a campaign with independent contributions. Under $100 is my average contribution size, and I have more contributors than anybody else in the race. And in addition to that, I am the only person in the Democratic side that actually has a detailed plan to take on the Trump administration, which needs to be a top priority of the next Attorney General.
Mr. Quinn.
All my life, I've taken on big shots on behalf of everyday people. I don't have conflicts of interest. I think it's very important that the Attorney General be the lawyer for the people. Workers, taxpayers, consumers, veterans, voters. I've represented all of them. I know the people of Illinois.
Mr. Raoul.
My record, I've got a history of working on in a bipartisan manner to solve difficult problems. be it law enforcement reform, criminal justice reform, workers' compensation reform, creating a public access counselor in the Attorney General's office, environmental reform, we're protecting workers' rights, just sent a bill to the governor's office. I've got experience working a bipartisan. I think that Attorney General should be operating in a nonpartisan way, and I have a history of doing that.
Ms. Vernon. I bring a background in business and in law. I have an MBA and a law degree, and I've been a mayor for 7 years, which means I've handled a large budget, a lot of staff, worked with collective bargaining units, and know how to move the ball forward across a broad range of constituencies. I also bring a record of advocacy, standing up against the NRA, for the environment, for reproductive choice, for ethics, for access to justice. Those are the qualities you need in someone who's going to be the advocate for all of the people of the state of Illinois and move this state forward. Mr. Ruiz.
Collective life experience. As the son of a migrant farm worker from Mexico with only a third-grade education, professional experience in business and in law, and the courage and integrity to always do what's right, even at your own peril. So when I saw Forrest Claypool try to bring in an old buddy as general counsel, I voted against him. I reported it to the chief ethics officer, and that's what was cited in the Inspector General investigation that led to his downfall. And even though I worked with him and I respected him for his prior public service, I was the first person to call for his resignation. So you'll know a public servant who will do the right thing for you every day.
Let's have a round of applause for all of them.